What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today we are going to talk about the 2-5-1 chord progression. If you are learning how to improvise on the saxophone or any instrument for that matter, then you need to know the 2-5-1 chord progression. It's going to pop up everywhere, especially if you are playing jazz music. So I am going to do this lesson from the perspective of a single note player, like a saxophone player or a trumpet player or a flute player, where we can only play one note at a time. When piano players and guitar players, chordal instruments, talk about 2-5-1s, they're usually talking about the chords and how to play the chords and move from one to the next. As single note instrument players, when we're talking about a 2-5-1, we're almost always talking about improvising. So I'm going to do this lesson from that perspective. So the 2-5-1 chord progression is actually pretty easy to figure out. The first thing you need to know is what a progression is. And a progression is just the fancy musical term for the way chords move from one to the next. So that is a chord progression. The 2-5-1 chord progression is a very specific chord progression that is based on modes. If you don't know what modes are, it's a pretty easy concept. It is when you play scales based on every degree of the major scale. So if I play a G scale, that is from G to G with an F sharp in it. And the modal name for that is Ionian. We never call it Ionian, we always call it the major scale, but its modal name is Ionian. So if we play a G scale, but if we started on the second note of the G scale, which would be G, A, and then we play from A to A in the key of G, that would be your second mode. And that second mode starts on the second degree of the scale, which is A. So I'm going to play from A to A with an F sharp. So that is the second mode, and that mode is called Dorian or Dorian minor. Now, when I play that mode starting on the A, but in the key of G, that gives me a flat third. So I'm taking the C sharp that would normally be in my A scale, and it's lowered down to a C natural. And I'm taking the G sharp, which would normally be in the A scale, and that's lowered down to a G natural. So your Dorian minor mode has a flat third and a flat seventh. Now you can play your modes on each scale degree, but for this lesson, we want to talk about the 2-5-1 chord progression. So we're going to concentrate on the second mode, the fifth mode, and the first mode, which is just your major scale. So the fifth mode would be based on the fifth note of the scale, and we're talking about the G major scale, so that would be G, A, B, C, D. So the fifth mode is called the Mixolydian mode, and that would be D to D with just an F sharp. So we're taking the seventh degree that would normally be in your D scale, which is a C sharp, and it's lowered to a C natural. So the Mixolydian mode has a flat seventh, and that sounds like this. So when we play those modes back to back, we're going to be using all of the same notes. We're just going to be starting on a different note each time. So for the 2, that would be A Dorian minor, which is A to A with just an F sharp. Then when we go to the 5, that would be D Mixolydian, and that is D to D with an F sharp. And then when we just play the major scale, that would be G to G with an F sharp. So when we're talking about the 2-5-1 chord progression, we're talking about the second mode, the fifth mode, and the first mode. And when we talk about progressions, we're talking about chords. So we're talking about the 2 chord, the 5 chord, and the 1 chord. So let's figure out these chords. The 2 chord would be an A minor 7 chord. It's an A minor 7 chord because the 3rd and 7th are lowered in your Dorian mode. So your A minor 7 chord is A, C, E, and G. And your 5 chord is a D7 chord, a D dominant 7th chord. A dominant 7th just means that you lower the 7th degree. So in your D scale, you usually have a C sharp, but that is lowered to a C natural. So the notes in your D dominant 7th chord or the 5 chord would be D, F sharp, A, and C, and that would sound like this. And then, of course, the 1 chord, which is a G major 7 chord. So the notes in that are G, B, D, and F sharp. So if you put that all together, you're going to have an A minor 7 chord, a D7 chord, and a G major 7 chord. And that would sound like this. When I play that, even though all of those notes come from modes in the G major scale, you can definitely hear the chords change. All of the scales that those three chords are based off of all have the same key signature as the one chord, which in the case of G is an F sharp. So the first way to practice your 2-5-1s is to just do chord outlines. And another great way to practice your 2-5-1 chord progression is to play the scales that go along with the chords. So in the key of G, I'm going to play the A Dorian minor scale, then the D Mixolydian scale, and then the G major scale. And it'll sound like this. Now, if you want that to sound a lot more like a musical idea, you can play what I call 2-5-1 scales. So a 2-5-1 scale is when you go up the 2. So I'm going to go up the A Dorian minor scale. Then I'm going to go down the D Mixolydian scale. Then I'm going to go up the G major scale. But I like to enclose that last note. So I'm going to go F sharp, A, and then land on the G. Listen to the G major scale again. When I play my 2-5-1 scale like that, you're really going to be able to hear the chord movement. Even though all of those scales have the same notes in them, you can definitely hear those chords moving by me bringing out the different modes that we're using in the 2-5-1 chord progression. Now there are tons of different ways to improvise over these chords, but I'm going to start you off with a couple easy ones. The first one is just playing in the key of the 1. So if we're doing a 2-5-1 in the key of G, all of the notes and all of the chords are in your G major scale. So technically, I could just play my G major scale over all of the chords. That would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. When I do that, it works because I'm playing all of the right notes, but you don't hear any of the chord changes. So if you're just getting started improvising over a 2-5-1 chord, this is a really good starter way to play over a 2-5-1 chord, but you're really missing hearing the chords change. You're missing hearing the chord progression, and that's a super important part. So your next step would be playing a chord outline solo. So a chord outline solo is where you only use chord tones to improvise. So for the A minor 7, I would play the notes A, C, E, and G. For the D7, I'd play D, F sharp, A, and C. And then for the G major 7, I'd play G, B, D, and F sharp. But I would make them sound like improvised ideas. So I'm going to start off with a really simple idea so you can hear it, and then I'll make it sound a little bit more advanced. So this is the basic chord outline solo over a G major 2-5-1. 1, 2, 3, 4. You could hear the chords, you could hear that I was bringing out the chord tones, and you could hear the progression because I was bringing out the chord tones. So you want to get to that step as soon as possible, because if you're playing over chord changes, you want to be able to hear the chord changes in your solo. That was a really basic example of a chord outline solo. Now I'm going to do another one where I switch up the note orders more and I make it sound a lot more like a musical idea. I'm still only going to use chord tones, but I'm going to make it sound like a musical thought. That definitely sounds a whole lot more like an improvised solo. So your first step is just playing in the key of the 1 because all 3 of your chords have the same key signature. But your second step, what you want to move on to as soon as possible, is to play a chord outline solo so you get really used to bringing out the chord tones so that you could hear the chord progression. Then the next step is add in the scales that go along with the chords. So for your A minor 7, you want to use your A Dorian minor scale. For the D7, you want to use your D Mixolydian scale. And for your G major 7, you want to use your G major scale. So the 2-5-1 chord progression comes from some of the modes in your major scale. The 2 is the Dorian minor mode, the 5 is the Mixolydian mode, and the 1 is the Ionian mode, also known as your major scale.